Listen, I'm not gonna film every day. I know that is too much. But my semester hasn't started yet, and my poor roommate has like a lot of COVID symptoms, so I'm not gonna go talk to her. So we're gonna film another video. Two things before we start. First of all, I usually don't finish books that I don't like, so most of these reviews are gonna be positive. Second of all, I'm a terrible writer, so even if I hated a book, it's way better than what I could have done. Mad respect to the authors. Let's get started. Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End by Atul Gawande. This is great nonfiction about dying and our healthcare system and what we do well and what we don't do well. No one thinks they're interested in geriatrics, but you should read this book, it's really good. A Simple Plan by Scott B. Smith. This is about a bunch of buddies who find some cash and, there's all these moral dilemmas. It's about greed and betrayal. It was fine. A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. This one is tough to review. I didn't know anything about Jamaican culture or history, so I really loved learning about that. I cared a lot about the characters, like you just feel for them. And they're really different characters. It's very imaginative, huge scope, so I loved that. It was tough for me to get through though. It's really long, it's really violent. A lot of it's written in Jamaican patois, which is interesting and adds to the atmosphere, but it does make it harder to get through. It just takes a little longer. It's a tough one, but it was good. The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. This is a big synthesis of what we know about what makes us happy. And he uses like ancient philosophies and religions as well as science. I thought that synthesis was really cool, like combining those two worlds and seeing how they overlap. One of the parts that stuck with me most was where he talks about what has been proven over and over as things that can make us happier. And some of those things were psychiatric drugs, if you need them, and meditation. I've incorporated both those things in my life and it's really made a difference. So I appreciate it, Mr. Haidt. Thank you. Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. This to me is a classic book club book. You could recommend this to anyone and they're gonna like it. You've got these heartwarming stories of people going to therapy, trying to work out their problems. You're invested. You get some great therapy, mental health tips along the way. It's not great the way some books are great, but it's very good. The First Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is fantasy. We've got some Avatar, Earthbender vibes, end of the world. It was good. Especially the beginning I thought was really strong. I was super interested and invested in the characters. Towards the end, I wasn't liking it as much. And then later when I tried to read the second book, I just gave up on it. So, not my favorites, but I don't really like fantasy anyway, so pretty good for me. Now we're to the first truly great book that I read last year, The Idiot by Elif Batuman. It's about a Turkish-American girl who's at her first year in college at Harvard, and she's kind of an idiot sometimes, like we all are, and so she's figuring out her life. Thank goodness Sunbeams just recommended this. I wouldn't have picked it up because it gets some bad reviews. We need to set the record straight. This is a great book. People say, oh, nothing happens. It was boring. It's all in her head. First of all, she's at Harvard, so she's taking all these cool classes, which you get to also learn what she's learning. And then she sort of incorporates what she's learning into her life in a really interesting way. She's weaving these together with what's happening to her with boys and roommates. And I loved it. Also, it is so funny. I laughed every 5 pages. I laughed more than I laugh at David Sedaris books. I told my dad that. He almost disowned me. But I'm right. The Stranger by Albert Camus. In this one, you're in the head of a man who's very existentialist. Is there right and wrong? Does anything matter? All of that, which is pretty interesting, especially since it was published in the 40s, near the beginning of that movement. I liked it. It's very short, very weird, makes you think a lot. What more can you ask? Possession by A.S. Byatt. This one is a fat novel that was popular in the 90s. It follows some scholars of Victorian poets as they sort of try and uncover this mystery. I didn't really like the end or the middle or the beginning. But after I finished it, I really missed it. Like, I missed being in the world that she'd created, and I mean, the writing is really good. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This one was a mixed bag. I really liked the last couple chapters. I'm a Christian, and so I just really liked the analogies. It was helpful to me, interesting. But I mean, some of the things, like his views on marriage, it's not a perfect book. Homesick for Another World by Ottessa Moshfegh. I read her novel, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Hated it. I hate that book. Anytime someone recommends it, I know I can't trust them anymore. So I don't know what compelled me to read this collection of short stories, but it was fantastic. Ottessa, you have my respect. You're forgiven for writing that other book. These stories are so creative, and they're so potently depressing. Like, just the very worst of humanity compressed into like 10 or 11 short stories. Very eerie, just powerful. The Lonely Polygamist by Brady Udall. This is about a modern polygamist family. Polygamist means there's like one husband and many wives, lots of children, living in southern Utah. And this book is so funny. It reminds me of Jojo Rabbit a little bit in that it deals with something pretty serious, but somehow it's funny without making fun of the people in it. I read actually that Udall lived with some polygamist families for a couple months in preparation of writing this book, and I think that really comes through. It's a really compassionate view of them and their situation. The joke's not on them, it's more on the bad situations they get themselves into. I really enjoyed it. The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This one's sort of a modern classic, is written in the 1980s and set in the early 1900s. I didn't love it. It's about Celie and her family. They're in Georgia. They're Black. Life is hard, but then sometimes life is good. I'm glad that Walker paved the way for more Black stories, more queer stories to come forward. But I just didn't really like the writing that much. Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This one is so weird. It's like science fiction. There's a mysterious Area X, I believe in Florida, and we're sending expeditions into it, but they disappear or commit suicide, or it's very creepy. It's sort of about the environment. I would put in my earbuds and listen to it as an audiobook as I'm walking around and totally freak myself out. So that's good writing. I read the second book, Authority. I thought that one was kind of boring. I didn't love it. And then I read the third book, Acceptance, because I wanted to know, like, what's happening? What is Area X? Give me the answers. And there are no answers. Jeff, what the heck? So that was sort of disappointing to me, although it is also cool to just absorb weirdness without there being an explanation. It's the next day. My roommate did test positive. It's the first day of classes, and our power's out. So I attended one class on my phone. Now it's dead. No Wi-Fi. Let's review some books. Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. This book is really similar to me to 100 Years of Solitude. You've got magical realism, you've got like multi-generational story, and it's really clever, like things sort of come back to fit into each other. I was really empowered by what page are you on? I don't know his name, but that YouTuber said, I just don't think multi-generational epics are for me. Yeah, me too. Like, this was really well done, but it was exhausting for me to read. The Silent Woman by Janet Malcolm. This is like the biography to end all biographies of Sylvia Plath. It was a bit over my head, I think. Like, it's very academic, And a big portion of it is about, it sort of reflects on what biographies are, why we write them, and sort of points out the absurdity of, like, it's pretty weird to dig into the details of a dead person's life just because they're famous. So that was interesting. It did make me like Sylvia Plath less, which is not what I want. But I guess the truth's the truth, huh? Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. This was one of my favorite books of the year. It does have some problems though, so let's start with that. There's dozens of protagonists, and it tries to cover like a really diverse variety of experiences, so you'd think that we'd have characters from all kinds of backgrounds. No. They're mostly white, straight men, and the men are like described by their thoughts and their actions and sometimes their appearance, but it's not as important. It's not about how attractive they are, versus the women, like, you know how attractive every single female character in the book is. That gets under my skin so much. It's not just a social justice issue, it's also just bad writing. Like, if you're gonna do that, it has to be intentional, it has to be serving a purpose. This didn't feel intentional to me. It just feels like he sort of let his biases slip into his writing. So, with all that said, that it was still one of my favorite books of the year, that tells you how good it is. One of the big themes that stuck with me was entertainment and boredom and addiction. I read this book 6 months ago. I still think about it like once a week. And it's from before smartphones, and yet it has so much to do with the things that we deal with in our lives all the time. I loved the descriptions of tennis. I like how it all fits together and how you're always a little bit confused. If you read this, you just have to embrace the first 200 pages, you're going to be confused. So just embrace that. You're not stupid. Just enjoy the ride. Take it in. It's going to come together. Yes, the power's back. I'm going to go to class. All right, it's been a couple days. Here's what's happened. I started feeling really sick, like sore throat. We don't have a thermometer here, but I felt like feverish, couldn't focus on my classes. So I was like, yeah, I have it, right? And when people would ask me to hang out, I'd be like, no, I have corona. Sorry, bro, I can't. I go get tested. Negative. So, like, probably it's all in my head. They did do a second test, so we'll find out in a couple days. I might still be vindicated. But, yeah, I'm brilliant. So now I'm gonna have to tell some people, oh yeah, when I said I had corona, I meant that I thought I had corona. Anyway, let's talk about Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. This is short, true stories about people misjudging strangers, and they're kind of woven together around a theme. The stories were entertaining, everything's well written, but this book really irritated me. I have a minor in sociology, so basically I don't know anything about sociology except for how hard it is. Like, there's a reason that people get master's degrees in sociology. It's really difficult. Like, almost every assumption you have, it's gonna be wrong, and the data is really messy. Like, you can't rely on one anecdote, and it's just a really difficult field. You can't just claim you're a sociologist just because you're good at writing stories. So, Malcolm, we're over. I'm breaking up with you, but your book was still entertaining. Like, it's fine. Consider the Lobster and Other Essays by David Foster Wallace. This is just a collection of, like, his writings. I read it because I was still glowing post Infinite Jest. I didn't love them all, but some of them were real good. So, one of my favorites, it's available for free online. I'll link it in the description. Fermat's Enigma, The Epic Quest to Solve the World's Greatest Mathematical Problem by Simon Singh. This was good, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be. So basically, there's this problem that's been unsolved for centuries, and dozens of dedicated mathematicians have put their brains against it, and eventually it was solved recently. So it's kind of the story of the mathematicians who tried, and you do walk away with a sense of like, wow, imagine dedicating your life to a problem that may actually be impossible to solve. That is pretty incredible. Like, your life might go to waste and you're still gonna go day in and day out and try and solve it. That's amazing. But what I want is, like, I'm a math major. Math is so beautiful and gorgeous and interesting. And yes, it's difficult to understand sometimes, but I want like a Carl Sagan for math who just like exposes how gorgeous it is. And that's not what this is. Both Elif Batuman and David Foster Wallace have said that one of their main inspirations is Fyodor Dostoevsky. So I figured it was time. I looked at his most popular books. They're all about love and or war, which are like my least favorite themes. So I skipped down to Demons, which isn't about either of those things. And I really liked it. Like, the writing, the plot, the characters, they all get a thumbs up for me. Very interesting, well written, great descriptions. It's about a time in Russia that I don't know anything about, which I think means I also missed a lot. Like, there's definitely an anti-revolutionary theme going on, but I just don't know enough about the history to really understand what that meant in the context of the time it was published. But yeah, I wasn't disappointed. I saw a YouTube video of James Baldwin on some old talk show, and he's just speaking off the cuff, and it's like one of the best speeches I've ever heard. Like, just out of nowhere, he pulls this fully formed, compelling, eloquent speech. So that's when I decided to read The Fire Next Time. It, to me, like, it just wasn't as accessible as hearing him speak. I think a little bit's lost just seeing the words on the page, but it did definitely give me something to think about. I'll link the video that I saw too. They're There by Tommy Orange. You've got lots of Native American characters living in and around Oakland, California. They're all connected in different ways. They all get to speak in the first person in the book. And after finishing it, I was like, this guy for sure, one, is Native American, and two, grew up in Oakland, California. Like, it feels so real that you can tell that he's writing from experience. I would say there are a couple too many characters, or like it just doesn't quite come together. It's his debut book, so I think he's still got a few kinks to work out, but he does a lot of interesting things with contrast. So you've got Native Americans who historically, the big open plains, nature, and so to have them in a city, there's lots of interesting sentences that sort of juxtapose those ideas. It was good. Most of Western literature is really white and really male. So there is a big push now to write more diverse stories, even with the theme of diversity. And I think it's really hard to pull that off without it feeling really didactic and preachy. And so I'm super impressed by Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other. You've got 12 mostly Black British women, and you hear first-person accounts from each one, and they're all connected. They all know each other in some way. And the best part is they're really different, and they really disagree. So it mimics real life, where you think that you're the good guy when I'm sure there's someone out there who thinks you're controlling or annoying or something. And so you read the first-person account of, like, a student, for example, and you say, oh yeah, that teacher's being totally unfair. I don't understand what that woman's problem is. And then you like read the teacher's account, like, well, no, you know what? She's had a very hard life and she sacrificed a lot to be here. So I don't understand why the students are so ungrateful. It's really interesting. The theme is diversity and it totally works. The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. This book is perfect and I'm not going to be able to do it justice, but I'll try. So you've got a young historian, I can't remember, he's from somewhere in the West, and he's traveling to communist East Berlin, so, you know, he's in a different environment, there's some, like, humor there. Good writing, good plot, good characters, etc. But then there's gonna be sort of a little something that makes you doubt everything you've already read, and I can't say any more without spoiling it. So after reading about communist Berlin and the Dostoevsky I read earlier this year, I wanted to learn more about the Soviet Union and what it was like to be part of it. So I picked up Secondhand Time, The Last of the Soviets by Svetlana Alexievich. It's nonfiction, but like her type of nonfiction. So she interviewed lots of people with differing opinions who lived during the fall of the Soviet Union, and then she puts their experiences just back to back without structure or context. So the idea is that people's experiences just speak for themselves without her like intervening. I could have used a little more intervention, honestly. I got a little confused and I did miss like structure and context, but it is an amazing work of journalism to just hear all these people's experiences. And I looked her up afterwards. Remember all that violence in Belarus? She was like right in the thick of that. She's in her 70s, and she was like the last one of the opposition council who hadn't been kidnapped or exiled. And then eventually she did get away safely to Germany. But she's pretty cool. I would have liked to have heard more from her. East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I liked this for a couple of reasons. One, it portrays a time and place that I didn't know very much about, the Salinas Valley in California in the 50s. The characters they don't feel real. Like, there's a lot of exaggeration going on, but they're interesting. You like spending time with them. And it asks big questions. What is fate? What is a good life? What does it mean to be a good friend? It makes you think. It's old, but it doesn't feel old. Is it the best novel ever? Of course not. Stop saying that. But it's good. Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This is about two sisters. One is a cop, one is a prostitute. So there's some conflict there. And the opioid crisis is wrapped up in this. I like the conceit, like it's an interesting idea, but it's like a little soap opera-y. There's a lot of twists, like too many. Evicted by Matthew Desmond. This won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction a couple years ago. Desmond is a Princeton sociologist, so you can trust him at least more than Malcolm to know what he's doing. He writes about 8 different families in Milwaukee and their experiences with poverty and eviction. I would say for me, the structure didn't quite work. Like, I'm surprised it won the Pulitzer because for me, I don't think the writing was quite there. But, I mean, the content is heartbreaking. It makes you want to do something, which is the mark of a good book. The Noonday Demon, An Atlas of Depression by Andrew Solomon. This book is just everything we know about depression. It's super well researched. It's really long, but he's broken it up into chapters. I'll tell you right now which ones are the best. Depression and Breakdowns, those are the first 2. You gotta read those. And then the third one, Treatments, is super boring except for the end where he talks about going to Senegal. Don't miss that. And then all the other chapters, just read whatever you're interested in. You're not gonna miss anything if you just stop right there. But even saying that most of the book you can just stop reading, it's not that interesting, this was still one of my favorite books of the year. It helped me understand my own depression better. He doesn't really take the stance that, oh, depression's just chemical, or oh, it's like it's all in your head. He sort of mixes those two together. It's really compassionate. He speaks to people with a wide range of, like, from the mildest depression to the most severe. There's a reason it's the book on depression. Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. He's been a professor at lots of prestigious schools and dedicated his life to studying sleep, so I trust him, and the thesis of his book is you should sleep more and you should be really careful about depriving yourself of sleep. It's a little heavy-handed at times, like you're gonna start to roll your eyes a little bit, but it does get the message across. Weather by Jenny Offill. This one, it's set during the Trump election, and it's not really about plot, it's like atmospheric. It's building this sense of anxiety and turbulence. Climate anxiety is definitely in there too. I don't really think I latched onto the main character enough, so I was kind of glad when I was finished reading it. Basically, everyone who I know and respect has read The Age of Innocence, but I know it's a classic and I know it's a love story and I don't usually like those things, so I didn't really want to pick it up, but I just made myself start it. Also, I think my holds ran out at the library or something, and guess what? It's amazing. It's really well done. It is a love story, but the theme isn't like love, it's about it represents like choosing between what you should do and what you want to do. What do you do when you have responsibilities that conflict with your true desires? You can absolutely tell that Edith grew up in like the New York aristocracy because all the characters feel real. It's like she's writing about her best friends and enemies. It's delightful. This book, it's like listening to a good friend just talk. Like, it's smart, it's interesting, there are lots of digressions, but you don't care because you want to hear what the narrator has to say. I love dogs, and the dog is really sweet in this book. I'd say the biggest themes are grief and friendship. I'm not grieving and I still loved it, but I bet it would resonate even more if you were grieving the loss of a loved one. I stumbled on the Vox book club, which is run by Constance Grady, and she's picked a lot of books that I really like, so decided to join. It doesn't cost anything, but I committed, like, yeah, whatever her December book pick is, I'm gonna read it. And then she picked this book. I was just sure that I wasn't gonna like it. The description is like, this lesbian chick has dirty magazines and a sword. It just sounded terrible. So I started reading it, and the beginning, to be honest, I don't know, like, the main character's sense of humor is like a little not my sense of humor, but then it really starts to take off around page 50. It gets Hunger Games good. And it becomes clear that the author definitely didn't write the blurb. Like, the dirty magazines show up once or twice. And I was kind of worried about the lesbian part too. I mean, I'm bisexual, I don't have a problem with lesbians, but that generally means there's gonna be like a long, sappy love story. But no, it's the kind of representation I'm looking for. She's just a main character who also thinks girls are attractive sometimes. Like, it's not a love story. Well, you could, debatable. But Constance, I'm sorry I doubted you. This was great. I can't wait to read the next one. It's not like high literature, but it's so much fun. It's really well done. You're gonna like it. Wow, that was so long. No one's ever gonna watch this, but I sure had fun making it.